Hey there, welcome to episode 112 of the Social Business Engine podcast, the podcast where I invite thought leaders from all industries to share their expertise on social and digital communications best practices. I'm Bernie Borges from Find and Convert and your host of the Social Business Engine podcast. On today's episode, you are going to meet Brewster Stanislaw, Director of Product at Simply Measured. On this episode, you're going to learn what is meant by dark social. Yes, I said that right, dark social. Why you should care and what you can do about it. Now, this episode is sponsored by our very own Social Business Workshop for Business Development Professionals. This workshop is delivered online in both group and one-on-one coaching sessions. It's designed for business development teams who want to learn how to use social media channels to engage with prospects and customers to build key relationships that create sales pipeline opportunities. To learn more about this online workshop, visit socialbusinessengine.com/workshops. And now, here's my interview with Brewster Stanislaw, Director of Product at Simply Measured. Brewster, welcome to the Social Business Engine podcast.
Hi, Bernie. I'm glad to be here. Excited to chat with you today a little bit about dark social.
Dark social. I can't help but actually have that reaction.
You need to get the Darth Vader voice out, and really, dark social.
Yeah. I've been accused of having a dark voice in the past, but let's not go there. Let's keep the conversation light. All right. So, Brewster, you and I met at a recent social media strategy summit in Chicago, where I had the honor and distinction of introducing you as one of the keynote speakers, and your presentation, quite frankly, blew me away, and I really mean that. Both in content and also your delivery was really fantastic. So kudos to that. So let's, and I wanted to get you on the podcast so you can share all of that greatness with my listeners. So let's begin our conversation with first just a brief introduction to Simply Measured, because I think that has relevant context for our conversation.
Yeah, so Simply Measured is a software company in the social analytics space, and we provide over 50% of the Interbrand 100 social analytics that help them understand how they're performing in social, what's working and what's not, insights about their content and audience and channels that ultimately help drive improvement for social marketers. Okay, great.
So let's talk about dark social. First of all, what the heck is dark social? I can't even pronounce it.
Yeah, it's when you hear dark social, you think, what is that? It's a little bit scary and not quite as scary as it seems. So dark social is a term that was coined by Alexis Madrigal about I guess almost 4 years ago now. And what it does is it refers to all of the traffic that shows up at a website, at a .com, that was driven by social, but that looks like direct traffic in web analytics. So it's traffic that looks like someone just showed up there when really it was driven by social. And more technically speaking, it's traffic that doesn't have a referrer. So in web analytics, when you show up at a site, if you click from somewhere else, typically that site will pass a referrer and say, you came from Find and Convert, or you came from wherever. But a lot of social sharing mechanisms, and this is stuff like text and email and chat, a lot of especially mobile use cases of sharing. When you click links in those apps, in text messages, anywhere else, they don't pass a referrer, and thus you show up at the site looking like direct traffic, when in actuality you were really driven there by a social share.
Yeah, but you mentioned text and email, which is technically not social, but it still, if I understand you correctly, Brewster, it still falls into this category of dark. Is that right?
Yes, it still falls into this category of dark social. And from my perspective, I really try and espouse kind of a broader view of earned social sharing, because, when someone is texting their friend, right, to me, that is a very social action, right? That channel of texting your friend or of emailing your friend some piece of content. One way might be posting it to Facebook, but another way, I really look at social as sort of this digital embodiment of word of mouth. And that can happen in a number of different channels, some of which are public, where you're publicly sharing with your friends, and some of which are private, right? And all of those are kind of different ways to socially share.
That's interesting. Some are private and some are public. So to your point about I can be texting you something and it could be a link to a concert that I'm suggesting we go to. And so you click on it and you go there, but that's a private conversation. And that's still a dark social example, right?
Yes. And something that we found in terms of our data that we've seen is that up to about 70% of social sharing is dark social sharing. So that really is the most dominant way that people actually choose to share content. It's, they take a link and they share it via Facebook Messenger, or they share it in a professional setting via Slack, or they text their friend, or they share it via WhatsApp. And that's really becoming more and more the dominant way in which people share content.
Yeah. Okay. Now that's a staggering statistic, and I remember when you said that in your presentation, your keynote presentation at Social Media Strategy Summit. 70% of social sharing is dark. Do I have that right?
Yes.
Okay. So what are the ramifications to a social marketer who doesn't, do something about this? What are the ramifications to their marketing, their analytics, et cetera?
Yeah, and I think that's really twofold. One is, as we think about social as a way to develop signal, right? That's kind of what social listening is about, is understanding what is my audience talking about? What are consumers talking about? And so when you're looking at the world of sharing in public, you're only looking at 30% of that data, right? And so you're missing this sort of lion's share of signal of what people are actually sharing. What are they actually engaging with? And then the interesting thing about dark social in particular is that sharing is actually the most organic. It's the most indicative of a consumer's interest and intent. Because if you think about it, and I encourage you to think about your own sharing, Bernie, is kind of the things that you text your best friend or that you email your spouse. I mean, that's sort of your truest expression of self. And so when marketers aren't kind of tying into that signal, they're really missing consumers' most organic expression. And that's sort of from a top of funnel perspective. But if you think about the bottom of the funnel, is that these shares are also very intent filled, right? They actually drive a ton of conversion behavior. It's the type of thing where you might share your Christmas list, and here's the links to the 4 products I want for Christmas, right? These are very valuable at actually driving revenue, at driving business value. And, everybody kind of knows in marketing that the most powerful marketing channel of the world is word of mouth, right? And it has been forever. It touches 85% of purchases. And what you think about is dark social as this sort of private peer-to-peer sharing that's very much the bottom of the funnel. It's really that digital word of mouth. And it can be so powerful in shaping both a consumer's perception of a brand and ultimately their purchase behavior.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. Okay. So, all right. Well, we've defined what dark social is, and I think you've given us a really clear understanding of what it is and the ramifications to a social marketer. So, next obvious question, Brewster, is how does a social marketer deal with it, address it, get their arms around these missing insights?
Yeah. So, I mean, it can get pretty technically difficult. One way to do this is to dive very deep into your web analytics. Typically web analytics are built on refer analysis. And refer analysis is really built for a world that's all web-based, right? It's a world where everything's about links and everything's about search. It works very good in just a web-based world. But in a mobile world where refers aren't passed, it's a lot less effective. Mm-hmm. And so there is a field that exists in web analytics called the user agent. And what the user agent field tells you is the browser and device that someone is on when they're accessing your website. And so if you look at this, for example, Facebook's mobile app, even though in some cases it won't pass a refer, it will pass a user agent. It'll identify that the user is accessing this site, is browsing the site within Facebook's mobile app. And that's one way to shine a little bit of light on what would have otherwise been potentially a dark social share and dark social traffic, because it might not have passed a refer. Mm-hmm. And so if you really kind of dive into that type of user agent analysis, you can start to see more of this.
And is the user agent detail, you're saying that's deep into the logs of your web analytics?
Yeah, but you can also surface it via your web analytics solution. So if you're using Google Analytics or you're using other analytics solution, you can actually look at user agents. It's just not the preset default way. So it takes a little bit of customization, a little bit of a custom implementation to sort of get to the data and visualizations you'd want to see that could help surface more of that.
Okay. So just to get a little bit deeper in that, then you're saying it takes some customization. So is this what's the kind of role that a company is inside of a company that typically would do that?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be your web analyst, your web optimization analyst. Potentially it can be someone who's doing business intelligence. If you have a web dev team that also does analytics, it can be them as well. I mean, we're really, and I'm really trying to kind of move forward that the social marketer should think more and more about this. I really believe that social shouldn't exist as a silo. Social to me is very much the connective tissue between all of the touch points that a brand will have with a consumer. So I really think social marketers should dive deeper into web analytics and should really understand their impact, not just within the social channels themselves, but across all of the different properties that a brand might have.
Yeah, you just reminded me actually of my conversation with Brian Solis, which was back on episode 109, where one of the things that he talked about in some recent research that he published was how the digital marketer, the head of digital, is someone who is now really focused on the customer experience. And one of the things that they have to do, to your point, Brewster, is they have to really get deep into analytics and insights to understand what that user experience is, not just understand sources of traffic, but to understand user behavior, customer behavior.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. I mean, I think, analytics are really valuable to the extent that they tell a story and become actionable. And so it's not enough just to look at the data. I mean, you really want to understand that data as indicative of what that customer experience is. And when you start to understand what that customer experience is, that's how you can begin to optimize, right? Begin to make changes. But the first step is be able to measure such that not only do you have data, but you have data that kind of builds a narrative, that creates insight and understanding that you can ultimately do something with.
I like your point about how it builds a narrative. And so if 70% of the social traffic is dark, right? Am I getting that right?
So it's 70% of social sharing. 50% of the traffic is actually dark. And the reason for that is because if you think about non-dark sharing or light social sharing, if you will, that typically happens in public forums where you're going to get more people interacting with the share. So a share in a public forum is going to drive more traffic per share than a dark social share, which tends to be more peer-to-peer, more one-to-one.
Okay, but the 50% part, can you repeat that one?
Yeah, so it's 50% of social traffic is from dark social sharing.
Okay.
And then 70% of social shares are dark social shares.
Okay. So that's huge when you consider how much traffic. Now, of course, it varies from company to company and industry and so forth.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
In some cases, that can be a very significant chunk of a website's traffic coming from social, right? I mean, if you're a brand in the beauty industry, heck, even if you're a brand in enterprise software, you can be doing a lot of LinkedIn shares, a lot of tweeting, and with links and all that sharing, all those links that are coming back to your website are basically, you're saying they're dark. What about something like URL shorteners? Whether it's from a Sprinkler or a Hootsuite or a Bitly, where does that fit in?
Yeah, I mean, so URL shortening is absolutely something that every brand should do. It's a best practice. It's a great way to understand how many people are clicking on all of the posts that you put out there. It has a few limitations in that a click does not equal a visit. We see people will click links and abandon before they actually get to the site, right? And once they get there, it becomes very hard to understand their behavior and their experience. You just know that we put some content out there, we got X clicks, and then separately in another kind of data silo, we know people came to our site and they did X, Y, and Z. But it makes it very difficult to connect the two. And when we talk to kind of about sort of building that narrative, it makes it hard to tell that narrative because you kind of have two disparate data sources that aren't bridged together. But I absolutely do recommend using link shortening because you want to understand what that click rate is. Then you want to understand what happens when the traffic gets there. And so, I think the best social marketers and digital marketers are ones that kind of take that a step further in their analysis and really trying to think about the entirety of that customer journey, right? From when they put content out there, how do people interact? How do they engage with it? Do they click through? Do they come to the site? When do they come to the site? What do they do? Do they return subsequently? And then do they convert? And then are they an advocate down the line? We really want to encourage folks to think about the entire customer journey in social because social doesn't just impact the top of the funnel. Social has an impact through the entirety of the customer journey. And you really need to be intentional when creating social content to understand, what are our goals with this content? What part of the journey are we really trying to impact here?
Right. Yeah. Great insights. So I really want to go next to, in the business that you're in is Simply Measured, of actually providing technology for brands to actually, measure their social activity. You must have some examples of some brands. You don't need to name them by name, but some examples of companies that have actually really gotten their arms around this in a productive way. And, maybe they've done some really great insights to what you just described of understanding the entirety of the customer journey. And so I'd love to hear maybe an example or two. And again, you don't have to name brands of, companies that have actually, maybe they've made some decisions as a result of what they learned, and those decisions generated some business outcomes. Because, we like to talk about that stuff, here in the Social Business Engine podcast.
Yeah, and we're right there with you. I mean, from our perspective, social marketing is about driving business impact.
Yep.
It's about driving business value. So, when you talk about social business, that absolutely resonates with me and also with Simply Measured. We really believe that's what you need to be driving towards. It's not enough to just say we put out some social content and people engage with it. Right. But yeah, let me walk you through, a couple examples. So, one is of a leading international cosmetics company. It's interesting you brought up the example of cosmetics company earlier, so you kind of primed me for this. But they had they had a suspicion really that social was driving a ton of value for them, but they weren't really seeing it in their web analytics or their commerce analytics. And you kind of talked about social being half of traffic, and what we find often is folks wind up, when they look in their web analytics, this enormous bucket of direct traffic. Mm-hmm. And they say to themselves, this can't possibly be direct traffic. People aren't typing in this very long URL and going here. It doesn't make sense. Right. This was a suspicion of this cosmetics company. And so, in using our solution, what they were able to do was actually determine that of their unattributed purchases, of purchases that they thought were just direct, that actually 72% of them were driven by social.
Wow.
And so, and if you think about it, it makes sense, right? I mean, the cosmetics use case is very much one where you're texting a lipstick to your friend and saying, hey, what do you think about this?
I haven't done that recently, but yeah, I can appreciate that. Yeah.
Well, I'm telling you, now I'm getting too personal with you, but for me at least, if you're sharing these kind of cosmetics products, in many cases you're doing them in very private scenarios, and it drives purchase behaviors. And the other thing that it surfaces is there are these folks who are micro mavens, right? They may not be fashion and beauty bloggers, but they're very influential amongst their group of friends, of maybe 5-10 people. And when they share a product, they say, what do you guys think about this? It actually goes and drives 3 purchases. And there are tons of these micro mavens. So when you think about influencers in general, of course you can kind of go for the big people who are going to be on the cover of People. But then there are these smaller scale folks, and when you start to think about aggregating their influence, it can be equally valuable. So for this cosmetics company, because they were able to show that dark social was driving so much sales, and particularly they were understanding which products were being shared and driving those sales, it became a key signal to them in terms of how to run their social campaigns. And they actually went to the e-commerce team and to the CMO and said, we need more budget. We now understand which products are being shared in dark social. And look, they're driving all these purchases that we previously didn't know about. We want to be promoting them. We want to be engaging with these influencers. And so they were able to garner more budget in that next cycle as a result of this data, and then ultimately run a lot more campaigns, again, leveraging this data.
That's awesome. Did they also know which social channels were driving the purchases?
So in some cases, yes, and in some cases, no. Our solution is able to correctly attribute what looks like dark social to channels like Facebook, to channels like Pinterest, to channels like Twitter. So we can actually, that stuff all looks like dark social, but really it's actually not. And so we can correctly show the full impact of those various social channels. But for some of the true dark stuff, let's say text and WhatsApp, for example, we're actually not at the level where we can differentiate between a text message and a WhatsApp message. We can say that it was a mobile messaging app.
Right. Okay. That makes sense.
And we ultimately definitely want to get to the level of granularity where we can tell you, it's this email client, it's this messaging systems, because in the future we think more and more that that's where brands are going to be engaging. I think a great example of that is Facebook Messenger. Facebook recently announced at F8 that they're going to start allowing advertising kind of directly in Messenger. And because they know that that's where people are migrating to, that's where more of the sharing is happening. There's been this sort of big outcry that the amount of sharing on Facebook is going down. What are they going to do? There's no more organic content. But what Facebook knows is the amount of sharing is continuing to increase. There's this old thing, Zuckerberg's law, the amount of sharing today is greater than the amount of sharing yesterday. And that still holds true. It's just a lot of that sharing is migrating to properties they own, things like WhatsApp, things like Facebook Messenger.
Right. Okay, so Brewster, before I get to the wrap of what we discussed here today, I want to ask you one more question, and that is, so for the listener who's hearing about dark social either for the first time or maybe they just haven't paid that much attention to it, even if they've heard about it before, what are some actionable advice takeaways that you'd really suggest that they go do, like now, as a result of understanding the impact of dark social?
Yeah, I would say go take a look at your web analytics today. Look at how much direct traffic you have and sanity check yourself and say, if we're a social brand, is it really possible that we have this much direct traffic? And then if you make that sanity check and ask yourself and say, I think this seems a little bit high, then go out and start to dig into those web analytics. And if you're not the person who can get access, go interface with those teams, right? Because the web teams are there. This is a mystery to them. They may not have the exposure or the social knowledge that they need to dig into this. And I would, as a social marketer, want to position myself as the expert in this space, in my org. And it helps me actually go collaborate with other parts of the organization, other parts of the marketing org, parts of the product org. This is a place where social can really, again, kind of be that connective tissue and say, hey guys, we know something is going on here and we can actually help you because we understand this probably better than anyone else in the org. Because often I think social is too siloed. Social shouldn't be siloed. Social should be a layer that lives throughout the organization.
Exactly.
And the interesting thing about dark social is that it touches, every sort of part of an organization. And if you can kind of take that insight and take it across your org and evangelize it and say, let's get to the bottom of this and get a deeper understanding. These are insights that can help everyone from product marketing to product development to sales, right? These are insights that are, because they're so organic, because they're really about the heart of what a customer wants, they're valuable to everybody. And we think the social marketing team, the social marketer, should own them and should be able to help deliver that value to the rest of the organization.
I would also, I totally agree. I also think that even the customer service department would benefit from knowing, which products are driving traffic as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. If I neglected to say customer service, I absolutely should have, because
it's okay.
It's very key to customer service as well.
I got your back, Brewster.
Thank you.
We're a team.
We're to be nowhere.
All right, cool. So let's take this to a summary level here. So this is the part of the podcast where I kind of read back to you my notes that summarize what we discussed here today. And then what I ask you to do, Brewster, is to clarify anything that needs clarification, correct anything that I might have said wrong, or just elaborate on anything. And so here we go. We started out with just a definition. Well, first of all, a brief introduction to your company, Simply Measured, that you provide technology for brands to perform rather measure how they're performing on social. We talked about what is dark social. You said it's a term that was coined about 4 years ago, and it refers to all the traffic that's driven to a website by social. However, it appears in your analytics as direct traffic. And essentially, it doesn't have a referrer. So it can come from not only social media, but it can come from text, email, chat, and obviously a whole bunch of social media sites. You talked about this amazing statistic of 70% of social sharing is dark, and 50% of social traffic is from dark social. However, the thing about it is that that traffic is among the most intimate sharing. And so it can come from not only some of those social media apps, but even like messaging apps like Slack and WhatsApp and so forth. And since they've exploded in popularity, those are potentially, big sources. We talked a little bit about URL shortening, which is very popular. It's been around for a while. You say it's still a continued best practice, but it is limited because a click is not necessarily a visit and doesn't really help you understand a visitor's behavior once they're on the website. We also talked about the ramifications of dark social to social marketers, that they can't understand necessarily what the consumer is talking about. They're missing signals that can really help them understand, the conversion behaviors. And really, more importantly, the bottom line to that is they can't understand the entirety of the customer journey. So really, this is impacting not just the bottom of the funnel, but the top of the funnel, the middle of the funnel, and then, of course, the bottom of the funnel. And so we talked a little bit about how can marketers get their arms around dark social, and you start with, get deep into your web analytics. You can either dive into the logs, which is really geeky. I would never do that. Or, just through Google Analytics. I mean, there are ways to discover it. You can look for user agents that will tell you what browsers and devices they use to access your website. And basically just get with, your analytics team if you have access to them, the web dev team. And social marketers really need to be partnering with those kinds of resources to figure this out. And then we finished on two things. One was an awesome example of a cosmetics company and how they suspected that social was driving traffic, but they really didn't know what the value was. And once they dug into it, and these are your customers as Simply Measured, if I understand correctly, Brewster, and once this company dug into it, they discovered that 72% of direct purchases were driven by social. That's amazing. And so once they discovered that, they were able to discover a few things. One is micromavens. I love that term. People who are influential among their friends, driving, purchases, and also understanding which products are driving sales. And that gave them the business case to go back and ask for more budget for specific campaigns. And the last thing we covered was what actions a social marketer should take. And first, look at analytics, see how much traffic is coming from quote-unquote direct. And if it's unusually high, then dig into your analytics, talk to resources in the web team, partner with them, get them to really, geek out with you or for you and dive into the user agent data and really understand, the dark social details that we discussed here today. Because ultimately, the whole social traffic can really provide a connective tissue of traffic coming to the website and really can provide great insights into various parts of the business, such as product marketing, product development, sales, and of course, customer service. So a little long-winded, but those are, kind of the main things we discussed, kind of key takeaways. Did I miss anything, or do you want to elaborate on anything?
I think you are a master summarizer, Bernie. I think that was very well done.
Okay, great. Well, where would you like to send people online, Brewster, to get to know more about you and what you're doing at Simply Measured and this whole topic of dark social?
Yeah, I would send people to the Simply Measured blog, which is available at simplymeasured.com. We have a tremendous content team that focuses a lot on dark social and a lot on attribution. We provide a lot of insights, a lot of data, not just that we see, but from around the marketplace. And we really try and be a thought leader there. And, from our perspective, we don't just want to help folks measure their social. We ultimately want to optimize for them. We want to help them drive improvement. And we think creating great content and helping folks learn about this and other key things within the social world will help drive that improvement.
Awesome. Well, my listeners know that we will have a link to that in our show notes. So for those that are mobile right now, as you know, just don't worry about that. Just go to our website at socialbusinessengine.com and visit this episode 112, and we will link that up. Well, Brewster, thank you so much for sharing your social business insights today on dark social. Really gave us some light on the topic. Oh boy, that was cheesy. Sorry.
I liked it.
All right, terrific. Well, I hope that you enjoyed my conversation with Brewster, Director of Product at Simply Measured. I know I did. And of course, I want to remind you that this episode is sponsored by our very own social business workshop for business development professionals. You can learn more about this online workshop at socialbusinessengine.com/workshops. And if you are not subscribed by email to get our weekly podcast updates, just like this one, which we send every Friday, just visit our subscribe page at socialbusinessengine.com so that you don't miss our weekly updates on Friday mornings. And hey, would you consider writing a review of this podcast in iTunes so that others might discover the Social Business Engine podcast? You can get to that just directly from socialbusinessengine.com/iTunes. And lastly, I would invite you to engage with me on Twitter. I'm at Bernie Borges. This podcast is also on Twitter and Instagram with the same handle, which is at SB Engine. And the hashtag that we use most frequently is SBE Show. Well, hey, that's going to do it for episode 112. I want to thank my guest once again, Brewster Stanislaw, Director of Product at Simply Measured. This is Bernie Borges of Find and Convert, wishing you continued success on your social business journey.